All right, friends. Well, like I said, we are back, and I'm excited to start a new series with you guys. We just finished a series on called how we are called to make disciples of all nations, and what it means to be a disciple of Christ. And this series is called A Life of Faith and Adventure. A Life of Faith and Adventure. So we're going to take a look at Jesus's call to the disciples and the trust that it took for them to follow him. But we're going to look at another story of trust that's not in the Bible before we jump into our scripture today. Have you guys ever heard of the story of Charles Blondin? Anybody? Charles Blondin. He was, in the 1850s, this French man. He was known for these like daring feats of bravery, right? And specifically, he was a tightrope walker. Okay, he would get on a tightrope and he would walk across the tightrope in these huge open spaces. So he was known for walking across Niagara Falls. Do you guys know where Niagara Falls is? Yeah, huge drop, right? You fall, you die. Don't even, I mean, that's just the name of the game, right? Fall, you die. And he set up a tightrope right across Niagara Falls, and he would walk across it on a tightrope. Not just one time, because that would be way too easy. But because Charles Blondin was a like showman, right? He would do something every time he would walk across it multiple times. He would do something even more daring, right? He crossed the Niagara Falls with a blindfold. He just walked across blindfolded. Okay. He also went across on stilts. Even sitting down halfway, he would walk down, sit down halfway, cook an omelet on the tightrope, and then would get up and finish walking the tightrope across Niagara Falls. This is a long span, right? This guy's crazy, right? So after stretching the rope, he proceeded to take a wheelbarrow, right? Boom, wheelbarrow. And he'd wheelbarrow, which is already kind of uneven, right? And he'd wheelbarrow across it. And everybody was cheering him on when he was doing this. And this is a true story, right? And so they would cheer him on. And then they said, he looked at anybody, said, he looked at the crowd and he said, does anybody think I can do this, right? And everyone's like, yeah, you can do it again, bro. Like, you can do it. So he got back on the rope, pushed this wheelbarrow back over to the other side, right? And then he says, do you guys think I could do it again? And the crowd goes, yes, yes. And he says, great. Can I have a volunteer to ride in the wheelbarrow with me as I walk across the stilts, or as I walk across the tightrope? But no one was brave enough to get in the wheelbarrow, obviously. And no one was brave enough. They all believed that he could do it. They said, yeah, do it. But when they were asked to get skin in the game and they said, hey, why don't you come and sit yourself in the wheelbarrow? They were not brave enough to do it. So that kind of leads to the question of whether or not they really believed he could do it, right? They said they believed he could do it, but did they really believe? If they weren't willing to trust their own lives in that, were they really believing that he could do it? I think a big problem is in that specific story is that the crowd, maybe they really do believe he could have walked across that tightrope, but they love to watch adventure, but putting themselves, as long as they weren't in the risk factor of this adventure. Does that make sense? So they like to watch it, but didn't like to take the risks that were involved in his adventures. And I think this is a great place to start our series tonight, because as we start this series, and I think it's 4 weeks, right? 3 or 4 weeks. Hopefully that'll take us to past our time of quarantine. Who knows when we're going to be able to meet in person again. But at least this will be the series for the next few foreseeable future, right? So as this series goes on, we're going to be looking at the life of some of Jesus's disciples who stepped into adventure, who stepped into the daring parts of the faith. In particular, we are going to look at the life of Peter. So Peter was someone who knew what it took to step out on the tightrope, right? So he didn't let fear and anxiety keep himself on the sidelines. But then all of a sudden, Peter was the guy who was filled with fear and anxiety, right? Peter has this life where you see like he's ready to die for Jesus and gets up and cuts off the ear of someone who tries to capture Jesus, right? He's ready to step into the adventure of Jesus. But then, and Peter's even willing to step out of the boat and start walking on water to find Jesus. But then he starts doubting and he's afraid and he starts sinking. And Peter's also the one who denied Jesus 3 times as he was leading to get crucified. So I think that if you look at ourselves and we truly look at ourselves, we can see that we are a lot like Peter. Sometimes we have a faith, the faith that it takes to step out on the tightrope, the faith that it takes to step out of the boat, right? Hopefully you guys remember that story of Peter walking on water, right? And then sometimes we let fear or anxiety keep us on the sidelines and say, no, you can do it over there, but like, I don't want to take the risk that's involved. And you hide. So, are you ready to start your new adventure? Hopefully you are. Now, Jesus invites us into an adventurous life of following him. And that's great, you might say. But the question on your guys' minds might be like a question of like, well, that's cool. If I'm called to follow Jesus, that's all great. But like, is he gonna, like, I don't know if I'm called to go like be a martyr in the Middle East. I don't know if I'm like could spend time away from the United States and my family, right? Many Christians are afraid that following Jesus means having to leave all the comforts of home to be some kind of missionary in a remote location in a village in nowhere. But Jesus doesn't call everyone to be missionaries in Africa, okay? Doesn't call everyone to be missionaries in Africa. He does, however, call us all to make disciples of all nations. And we've talked about that in length, about what that means to make disciples of all nations. But all nations does not have to mean Africa or China or Asia, right? It can mean your next door neighbor, your person across the street. No matter where he calls you, I can guarantee you that this is going to be a life of adventure. So the dictionary defines adventure as exciting or dangerous experience. That's what adventure means, an exciting or dangerous experience. So I'm pretty confident that when you guys are like, I'm going to log on to Zoom today and see what Josh has to say about youth group, you were probably not saying, I'm going to like log on and it's going to be adventurous, or what is it, dangerous, or exciting, right? Maybe exciting, hopefully, who knows? But dangerous, probably not. But this is exactly what Jesus had in mind. Exciting and dangerous life. And at some point you may say, hey, adventure is great. Stepping out, being adventurous, that's great, but it's not for everyone, right? Someone's got to stay home and mow the lawn and wash the dishes, and someone's got to be here and hold down the fort, right? We can't all be adventurous and shrink our responsibilities. And maybe that's true to some extent, but regardless what we do in life, we can find adventure with Christ. In fact, that I think it's our responsibility as Christians to look for adventure, the adventure of faith, no matter what our calling is, no matter where we end up in life. I think as Christians, we need to be looking for the adventurous life of following Jesus. See, God made us for adventure. He made us to try new things. And I think if you search your soul deep down, you'll find like a desire for adventure. Right? This is why we like going on car rides to like unknown places, right? Or we go on vacation to places we've never been before, right? Every time you've been somewhere you've never been and you're like looking around, like you're on an adventure. You're right. That's cool, right? And you're everybody has this like internal desire for some sort of adventure. This is why like we love movies and roller coasters, right? And haunted houses and great stories, and why we like watching rescue missions on TV, right? Because we like deep down love this sense of adventure. Well, in the story that we've read maybe 7 times in the last 6 or 7 weeks, we're going to read it again tonight because I think it's still applicable. And we're going to learn about the adventure that specifically 4 disciples took when they were called by Jesus. So you don't have to have your Bibles right now because I wrote it down for you. Matthew 4:18 through 22. Well, before I read that, I want to give you a quick history on the book of Matthew, because I think it's important to understand the author first, the author of Matthew. So the author of Matthew was one of the disciples, one of the 12 disciples. But before he was a disciple, he was a tax collector, okay, for the Roman government. But being a tax collector, you were not super popular because you were taking people's money at the time, right? And yeah, tax collectors were usually Jewish, and they were known for dishonesty and extorting more money than it was actually due from their own people. So even though he was Jewish, right, he would say, oh, you owe the Roman government $40, and he really only owed the government $35, and he would take 5 off the top. This is what like tax collectors were known for, right? But obviously, Matthew had a change of heart when he decided to follow Jesus, because he turned from a life of stealing money to sharing the news about Jesus. And a tax collector at this time had to be educated, all right? So specifically, Matthew's gospel is intellectual. You can see that as you read his writing, it's more intellectual and academic. And he makes more references to things like money in this gospel than the other 3 gospels that are out there, right? The book of Matthew takes the most historical approach of the 4 gospels, making it very logical. So those of you guys who are like very logical, Mr. Pete, I know you're there, or maybe you're not. I see you turned off your video camera, but you're a logical guy. Like Matthew's probably your book, right? There's a lot of logic here. The Gospel of Matthew begins by linking these prophets at the end of the Old Testament to the birth of Jesus through this, what's called like a genealogy, right? Okay, and so now here we are. That's the book of Matthew, like that's the author of Matthew. So let's dig in. Matthew chapter 4, verse 18. You can read it on your screen. Now, as Jesus was walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon, who was called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Fishers of men. Immediately they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw 2 other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, in the boat with Zebedee, their father, mending their nets. And he called to them. Immediately they left their boat and their father, and he followed them. Wow, is everybody gone from this video? Looks like everybody has their videos off. But there you go. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Naima. Thanks, Danny. I see you guys. All right, cool. I want to make sure everyone didn't leave, you know. But so here's this story of these people that were called by Jesus. I see you, Chelsea, Daisy. Thank you, guys. All right, cool. So these people that were called by Jesus, and they drop everything to pursue this adventure, right? The adventure of Jesus, of following Jesus. Peter, Andrew, James, and John, they were ready. They dropped everything. No questions asked. But it's important to know that Jesus said, come, follow me. His tone was like this command, right? More of a command than an invitation. It says, come, it's a command, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Jesus was telling them, I've got a job for you. I want to take a quick minute here to draw your attention to the phrase fishers of men. The popular consensus where people kind of land is that Jesus used this phrase because the men that he was calling were fishermen, right? And I think that that's pretty partially true. But if you remember, like I said earlier, Matthew's very academic. He would know a lot about the Old Testament, right? And so the phrase fishers of men could also be a reference to the Old Testament, specifically in Jeremiah. Now I will send for many fishermen, declares the Lord. Right? The Lord said, I'm going to find many fishermen, and they will catch them. And I will send many hunters, and they will hunt them down on every mountain and hill, from every crevices of the rocks. My eyes are on all their ways. They are not hidden from me, nor is their sin concealed from my eyes, right? So he's writing in here, I will send, I'm going to find the fishermen. Even though these fishermen were not educated, they likely maybe had a pretty good idea of the Old Testament because they were Jewish, right? So they'd been taught it since they were kids. So they might have been familiar with the book of Jeremiah at this point. So Jesus here, when he says, come follow me and I will make you fishers of men, I've said this before, he gets down on their level and he says, look, I'm speaking to you in a language that you know, right? Follow me and I will make you fishers of men. He's calling them to be a part of this important task. Right? This is specifically for Peter and Andrew. So James and John, the sons of Zebedee, we read that too, carrying on the family business. They were all fishing, and even their father was in the boat with them, and they're cleaning their nets. And then all of a sudden, so a real translation would probably be more like repairing. It says mending their nets, repairing their nets, most likely after this night of fishing. And all of a sudden, Jesus calls them, and they leave what they're doing. They leave their father and mother, and they go straight to follow Jesus. They followed the adventure, right? Can you imagine that for a second? This like adventurous like life, right? They're like fixing this rope or this net, and then all of a sudden Jesus says, come follow me, and they just leave. They just go, right? They don't have food, they don't have stuff, they don't have nothing, right? They don't have that. They don't have anything. They just get up and they go on this adventure. Think of yourself for a second. If I pull up to your house, Danny Naima, if I drove up to your house right now and I said, come on, let's go, and you just hopped in the car, you'd be on an adventure, right? You'd be like, let's go, right? I know you're muted, right? You'd be like, well, all right, we're going on an adventure now, right? This is what happened with Jesus and his disciples here, right? Now, Jesus doesn't always call us to leave our parents stranded, mending the net by himself, right? But he does always call us into a life of adventure. Perhaps Jesus is calling you to be adventurous and share your faith with somebody. Just share Jesus with somebody that's close to you. Maybe Jesus is calling you into the adventurous life of going on a missions trip. Maybe Jesus is calling you to volunteer your time to the church or the food bank. Maybe Jesus is calling you on an adventure. There are risks involved in these things. Some of these things appear dangerous, but are actually much safer than we think. Let me give you an example, right? So let's say flying on an airplane. How many of you guys have flown on an airplane before? Raise your hand. Okay. Do you guys know that flying on an airplane is actually 30 times safer than driving in a car? But you do not feel it. Picture yourself like the turbulence hits and you're like, dude, I'm so out of control right now. Dude, there's no way. Like if this plane goes down, I have no control over whether or not I die or not, right? And you feel this like angst and you feel so like it's so dangerous. But in reality, you're 30 times safer in a plane than you are in a car. We don't think about it because we have faith that we're going to get from point A to point B, right? Driving a car is more dangerous. We don't think about that because we know we're going to get from point A to point B. What is faith? Can you guys define faith for me? Anybody? Raise your hand if you think you can define faith. Sorry. Okay, Danny, you got it. Let's see. All right, Danny, what is faith? I think you're unmuted. Hello? Got to use your microphone. Oh, I know what Danny said. He was quoting scripture, Hebrews 11, right? He was saying faith is to be sure of the things we hope for and to be certain of the things we cannot see, right? Good job, Danny. Nice, man. Right? Hebrews 11. Faith is to be sure of the things that we hope for and to be certain of the things that we cannot see. The disciples had faith. They hoped in Jesus that there was hope that there were certain things that they couldn't see, right? Jesus was the promised Messiah. They couldn't see that he was the Messiah, yet they had faith. In the same way, you guys have faith in Jesus, even though you've never seen him before, right? Paul writes that, or Peter writes that in his book. In First Peter, he says, you have faith even though you have not seen, right? So the faith, I'm sorry, I lost my spot here. I want us to learn the faith that the disciples had. Most of us will probably never be asked to do something so dependent on faith as the disciples were. See, but the disciples, they were ready to die for their faith. They were ready to step into the adventure of death for their faith. I've had a conversation with some of you guys this week, and you guys were talking about Pastor Sue's message last week, and you were saying that you were scared to step out and share the gospel with your friends because, you know, what if they wouldn't like you? What if they thought they would you would judge them, right? I never wanted to tell you that I was this, you know, because I thought you'd judge me because you're one of those Christians that judge, right? I've heard those words come out of your mouth this week. But friends, God's calling us to step out in faith. How much greater was it for these apostles that we read about, these disciples that we read about? How much greater was the danger for them, right? Sharing their faith with the wrong person back then would get these guys killed, beheaded, hung on a cross, upside down, burned alive. This was the adventure that they were willing to go on. They were willing to step into the wheelbarrow and walk across the tightrope for Jesus, right? When I think of the last part of Hebrews 11, being certain of things we cannot see, I like to think of the movie Indiana Jones. Have you guys seen Indiana Jones before? Right, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, right? So here's why. It's 1938, Indiana Jones, 1938. Indiana Jones teams up with his father and to find the Holy Grail. Okay, that's biblical, right? The Holy Grail. And the cup that Jesus supposedly drank from at the Last Supper before the Nazis can get to it. The Nazis have taken Indiana Jones' dad as hostage at this point, right? And they force Indiana Jones to risk his life to get through several booby traps to get to the Holy Grail. And this is the last challenge. I'm going to share it with you guys, hopefully. New share. Let's see. All right, here we go. Give me 1 second here. Oh my goodness, can you guys see your guys' photos on here the whole time? Or could you guys see the slides? Both? Oh man. All right, let me stop this share real quick. Hi, friends. Here we go. Not getting sound yet. Hold on. We're gonna find it. Don't worry. Here we go. So Indiana Jones has to cross this leap of faith, is what it's called. Right?
Only a leap from the lion's head. It's impossible. Nobody can jump this. You must hurry. Come quick. It's a leap of faith. You must believe, boy. You must believe.
All right. Let's stop the sharing. All right, you guys can hear me okay? Good. I'm not gonna share more on the screen here, but
Yes? Oh, before time. Did you intend to leave us standing on the doorstep all day with drenched? Look, that gun and caught a sniffle. How you expect
watching Indiana Jones here. Sorry for the technical difficulties, friends. This is not usually the problem here. But, so you can guess Indiana Jones, what he did was he saved the day, all right? Believe it or not, he saved the day. He defeated the Nazis and saved his dad, and everything was good. And yeah, but in real life, faith is taking the steps into the unknown, into the invisible path that Indiana Jones, right? Like you saw Indiana Jones go for the invisible path. That was faith, right? It's called a leap of faith. He was like, it says it's there. I can see like there's like obviously no thing in front of me, and he just took the step of faith into the unknown, right? Giving up control to God instead of trying to keep control yourself, right? This is what it means to have faith. For some of us, control is a major issue in life. We can't imagine not being in control. But what you have to remember is there's a whole lot that's not in your control, right? But when you live a life with Jesus, there's a whole lot that we actually can control. Control is actually kind of like an illusion, kind of like how you saw the video pan out to the right and you saw that the road was actually just an optical illusion there. Ultimately, God is in control. He merely gives us the choice to recognize and honor that control, or to attempt to control our lives on our own. But I gotta tell you, when we try to control our lives our own and do our own path, it doesn't go very well usually.
Faith is trusting in God to reveal our path in front of us. Jesus invites us to follow this path. He invites us to follow him, come on an adventure. And I got to tell you, friends, it might be risky. It might cost you your life. It might get a little hairy. It might cause you to lose friendships. It might cause you to lose family members, right? Stepping out in faith for Jesus, right, is not always unicorns and rainbows, like I've said before, right? It can be risky, but it's so worth the risk. It's so worth the risk. If we do have faith that God is in control, Romans 8:31 is very comforting to us. It says, if God is for us, who can be against us? You guys ever heard that verse before? If God is for us, who can be against us? If you have faith in a God, if you've stepped out on an adventure and have faith that God is in control of your life, and if God is for you, who could be against you? Right? That faith grows and grows and grows. So, my friends, today I'm asking you, what adventure is Jesus calling you to? This guy named Bill Keane, or you can think of the turtle from Kung Fu Panda. You guys ever seen that movie, Kung Fu Panda? He has this quote, it says, yesterday is the past, tomorrow is the future, but today is a gift. That's why it's called the present, right? It's a pun. It's supposed to be kind of cheesy, but every day we wake up and we decide what we're going to do with the gift of life today. So I ask you today, friends, what are you going to do with your gift of life today? On what adventure is Jesus calling you into today? Don't be okay with just sitting on the sidelines and being like, that's cool. You can walk across that all you want from over there. Don't be okay with that. Step out and go on an adventure with Jesus. Step out, step into the wheelbarrow, because Jesus has done it 1,000 times and he'll continue to do it, right? He'll continue to provide for you, continue to be there for you. So while there are times when adventure is small and not super thrilling or exciting, we need to be careful that the daily grind doesn't wear us down to the point where we think that little things are not an adventure with God. Sometimes the adventure that God is calling you on is simply stating your faith, is simply standing up for what you believe in, is simply not doing, okay, the things that you're tempted with, right? Pursuing a life of holiness. God doesn't want us to live through other people, right? I'm reading a book right now called Anyone But Me. It's by this guy named Ray Comfort, and he's this evangelist. And the idea is, like, send anyone, but don't send me, right? Like, you guys are so good at doing that evangelism stuff, but, like, don't send me because, like, I'm not that good at it, right? It's not really my forte, right? But, like, I think our attitude needs to be the opposite, right? Send me. I want to go on the adventure, right? And I hope that that's where you guys are going to land after this series, of understanding that life with Jesus is not boring like some people think. Some people will be like, oh, that's boring to be like have faith in and live a Christian life. That's boring. In reality, it's an adventure, right? And it's something that we're all called in to do, to step out into the adventure and follow Christ, whatever that may be. So friends, I have 2 questions for you tonight, and I'm not going to put them up on your screen because I've already closed my PowerPoint. Your 2 questions are, have you ever had to take a leap of faith before? We're going to talk about that in 1 second. And to what adventure might Jesus be calling you on today? Why might you hesitate to follow him? When he calls you, are you going to drop everything and follow him like these disciples do? Okay. Has anybody ever had to take a leap of faith before? Anybody raise their hand? Tell me a leap of faith that you've had to take. Maybe a time when trusting in Jesus was hard and you've stepped out into that. maybe sharing your faith. I think I shared with you guys last week about my leap of faith, and I put my friendship on the line with my buddy, and it panned out so good, right? It panned out with some great conversation, and hopefully soon to be conversion to Christianity when I didn't think it was possible, right? Anybody else? Raise your hand. It's okay if you haven't. Chelsea, let me unmute you, kid. Go ahead.
So one time, my friend, so he was going through some tough time. His parents got divorced when he was like little. So what his parents like live in one state and then like he lives here.
Mhm.
So he was very depressed and stuff. Like he didn't know what to do. And he called me. He always calls me all the time at night. He's like, "Hey, I need your help. Like I don't really feel good. Like, can you help me?"
Mhm.
Like like you're the person I can go to. So he called me. He was like crying. And I'm like, "Oh, what's wrong?" He's like, "Nothing. I'm feeling like this and that, you know." And then I talked to my mom and stuff. And then I'm like, "Oh, what she tell you?" She told me to pray. So
Mm.
like I was like, "Oh, okay." And then she said, but like I don't know how to do that. he's like, "I don't know how to do that." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." But at that time he didn't know like I was Christian and stuff. He just like knew it was like, you know. And he was like, "Oh, can you like do you know how?" And I'm like, "Well, like I could pray for you, yeah, like over the phone, although I'm like not with you, but yeah, I can." So we
Wow.
prayed together.
Wow.
So yeah, he started like crying and crying and crying. So yeah,
That
that's
is
what happened.
very cool.
Yeah, so he's like, "I don't know how.
Mm.
How do you do it?" And I'm like, treat it as like you're talking to him. Like
So
don't treat it as like,
you were brave enough to put that relationship and say, "I'm going to pray with you," not just pray for you.
mhm,
It's easy to say like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to pray for you, bro." And then like you forget about it an hour later,
mhm,
10 minutes later, right?
yeah,
Guilty
so
as
yeah,
charged, right? I'm going to pray for you. And then you forget, right? And then like, you're like, oh, like as you're going to bed, maybe you remember it and you're like, "Dear Jesus, I pray for that person." You know, and
yeah,
but you took the time to actually pray with that person. I think that
yeah.
huge. Is that person a believer today or?
Not exactly.
Exactly.
No, they're actually like Catholic, but they don't really like go to church or anything.
Okay.
But
But the
they are going through something really hard right now, so it's not.
how many of you guys have been on missions trips before? Okay, Naima, I've seen you raise your hand, right? During your mission trip, did you ever have a chance to share the gospel with anybody? No? Talk about your faith with anybody? No? You're still muted, Naima. I don't know. I think your mic's unplugged. Check your, like, under the mic, the mute button. See if you can use speakers or something.
Hello? Does it work now? Oh! Well, shut up! You're a freaking loud person. Okay, what was I gonna say? Okay. Everywhere we went to in Costa Rica, there's like a lot of Christians already. Like even when we went to like this rehab center, it was a Christian rehab center.
Okay.
I didn't exactly get to personally talk to anyone myself, I feel like, but it's just like everywhere we went, there was a lot of Christians.
Hey, Naima, you stepping out in faith to step on the plane to get to Costa Rica, you think that was a leap of faith? That God was going to protect you during that time, that God was going to use you during that time to do whatever you did out there? What did you guys do out in Costa Rica?
We cut down this like, I don't know, it's just a bunch of plants like in the back. We sit down.
So you were able to serve the community.
Yeah, we were able to serve the community like that. I kind of helped them a little bit. We like repaved their driveway.
Oh, cool.
We had to like make our own cement, and then like they didn't have a cement mixer, so we had like this weird little circle with like shovels where we manually mixed the cement.
Oh, that's cool. I've been there before. That's terrible.
We fixed up the top of the roofs.
Mm-hmm.
They just have like these plates of metal as their roofs. So we found some and then fixed it up.
Right on.
We painted the bars outside of.
You did a lot of work, right?
Yeah, we did a lot. We did a lot. Damn, why are you here?
We can find computers for
That's cool. I mean, God used you in a different way in a different country, right? How many times can you say you've planted, cut down, acres of, tall grass and handmade cement in,
One time.
exactly. How many times can you say that you've done that in the United States? No times, right? But yet God took you 2,000 miles away to go to Costa Rica and, and strengthen your faith out there and strengthen the faith of those that were out there, encourage those that you went and saw, and the pastors that were out there, I'm sure were encouraged, right? Oh, somebody else. Anyways.
Daisy.
Yeah, you guessed Daisy.
Well, we're still on mute.
No, yeah, we're on mute.
So, all right. Well, friends, I know it was a little all over the place today, but the moral of the story is faith and adventure go hand in hand. Don't think that this Christian life is just boring and that you have to give up a sense of adventure or a sense of excitement to follow Jesus. Because when you follow Jesus and you truly follow Jesus to the best of your ability, it is an exciting life. It can be a dangerous life, right? Yeah, I mean, my brother is being led to the Middle East, to a country I can't even name because it's so dangerous to be there, right? It's a dangerous life. It's an exciting life, but it's a life where having that faith in God and trusting in Him is the way you get your salvation and the way you get into heaven, friends. So it's easy to count that out. So if someone comes to you and says like something like, oh, Christians are so boring, or you can't do this, you can't do that, you're right. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be associated with this, that, or the other. Instead, I'd rather live my life in this adventure, in that adventure, in the adventure that God calls me into. Let's pray, and then we can hang out and talk, all right? Heavenly Father, thank you for this time, God. I pray that someone would be inspired by this message, that to live a life that's adventurous, God, to step out in their faith, step off the ledge, to sit in the wheelbarrow and let you take them across, God. Would they be encouraged to share their faith with somebody this week? God, would you move through this message, God, and would you be with us this week? God, bless those who are taking their AP tests this coming week. Would you give them the answers, God? Would you help them to study well, to prepare well for that, God, and to succeed, God? Thank you for who you are. In Jesus' name.